The euphoria inspired by the Arab Spring met a sobering challenge in 2012, as new governments in Egypt and Libya struggled to build democratic institutions. While in Syria, continued opposition to the regime of President Bashar al-Assad turned into a full-scale civil war that threatened further to destabilize the Middle East. The year also saw the re-election of Barack Obama to the White House and a once-in-a-decade leadership transition in China. In Europe, the debt crisis continued taking a toll on the economy, but the monetary union remained in place. Syrian rebels and the government were locked in a violent and seemingly intractable struggle for control of the country. The war has severed Syria's population along sectarian and ethnic lines. It has caused deaths estimated in tens of thousands and created a humanitarian crisis within the country's borders. The big question is how long the Assad regime can hold on as it becomes increasingly isolated from the international community. Much will depend on whether the disparate rebel groups will receive full international recognition and support. 2012 also witnessed a rise to power of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, where Mohamed Morsi became the country's first freely elected president. The Brotherhood's ascendancy tested Egypt's stability, as Islamists and secular liberal protesters clashed over the shape of the country's emerging political structure. Tensions came to a head in November when Morsi declared himself above judicial authority. The move was seen by some as an absolute power grab and a bid to keep secular-leaning judges from dissolving an Islamist-led council drafting Egypt's new constitution. Morsi was credited meanwhile with engineering a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, a move that underscored Egypt's growing influence as a power broker, but not before the worst fighting between Israelis and Palestinians in 4 years took lives on both sides and raised the specter of war. In November, the UN voted to recognize the Palestinian territories in the West Bank as a non-member observer state over the objections of Israel and the US, marking a milestone with potentially far-reaching consequences for the Arab-Israeli conflict. Israel responded swiftly by announcing plans to advance a wave of construction in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. On September 11, a brazen attack on the U.S. consulate in the Libyan city of Benghazi killed the U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans. The incident sparked a security crisis in the North African country, elevated tensions in the region, and raised concerns about how well the U.S. can protect its diplomats overseas. The political consequences of the attack have reverberated in the U.S. long after the incident. Republicans argue the Obama administration mishandled security in Libya and provided contradictory statements in the wake of the attack. Senate Republicans are threatening to delay or block the nomination of UN Ambassador Susan Rice, the leading candidate to succeed Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
We will provide all the information that is available about what happened on that day.
In China, it was a year of unusual political turmoil, not what the Communist Party had hoped for ahead of a once-in-a-decade shuffle of top leaders in November. In the spring, Bo Xilai, a political high-flyer who had been seen as a candidate for the top party leadership, was ousted from his post, and in August, his wife was convicted of the murder of a British businessman. The Bo Xilai scandal fueled outrage among ordinary Chinese over official corruption. When China's 18th Party Congress finally convened in Beijing on November 8, China's leaders were also grappling with a slowing economy and escalating territorial tensions with neighbors around Asia. China's 7 new leaders walked on stage at Beijing's Great Hall of the People, a new lineup that didn't include the figures with the strongest track record on political reform. Nevertheless, the next day some of China's 500 million internet users were cautiously optimistic that Xi Jinping seemed a more relaxed leader than his predecessor, Hu Jintao. The good news about the European crisis in 2012 is that officials managed to avoid a collapse of the Union, the worst-case scenario that some had predicted last year, as the mounting fiscal problems of countries like Greece, Portugal, and Spain threatened to derail the monetary union. But 2012 also tested the notion that European officials could muddle through the crisis and buy time until global conditions improved. While a deal to help Greece seems within reach, and the other troubled nations appear to have staved off a major meltdown, unemployment continues to hit record levels and living standards continue to decline, showing that the situation in the Eurozone could get worse before it gets better. The Southeast Asian country Myanmar made rapid progress towards democratization and economic reform after years of stagnation. Aung San Suu Kyi, The political dissident and Nobel Prize laureate was released from house arrest and elected to parliament in free elections this year. In response, the US and the European Union eased existing bans on trade and investment to one of the most isolated countries in Asia.
I especially want to thank Aung San Suu Kyi for welcoming me to her home.
President Barack Obama became the first US sitting leader to visit Myanmar, calling on the nation to embrace democracy during his visit in mid-November. For the Wall Street Journal, I am Eduardo Kaplan.